Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Stuart Cohen. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for some of your colleagues to log in. But thanks so much for attending our session today. Be thinking about questions you want to ask to Jay Leek, managing partner at SYN Ventures, about some of the specific issues that, businesses are now dealing with. Maybe from a customer standpoint, maybe from a supply chain standpoint, maybe from a additional things that board members or investors may be asking, the audit committee, the compliance committees, the board members, the C-level executives on things they need to do to make sure their data is kept confidential and not at risk. So we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for people to log in, but thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, just a small fine note on that, Stuart. So it's SYN Ventures. It's a little geeky. It's like the TCP handshake. So it's a SYN packet. Every internet connection starts with SYN. I know it's technically not right for the real geeks on the line, but our mission is to secure every internet packet. So it starts with SYN. So anyways, little geeky as opposed to SYN.
I like it. I like it. It's good to know when you're inside baseball on some of these
things. Exactly.
So why don't we go ahead, we'll get started as people are logging in. First of all, I want to thank everybody again for joining. We are fortunate enough to have Jay Leek from SYN Ventures, for those of you that heard some of the slight dialogue while we were waiting. We're looking forward to his perspective on, with the increase in requirements, in the increase in cyber attacks, what are some things people are doing differently or need to be thinking about doing differently as it relates to whether it's security vendors or whether it's just general organizations in the marketplace. Once again, as always, we want to make these interactive, so please submit your questions in the question box, in the chat box. We'll do our best to get to all of those. We do have a few questions that were submitted in advance, so we'll get to those kind of right off the bat. As always, we do these sessions about every 2 weeks, so if you have a particular topic or presenter that you'd like us to hear from in this public service announcement that is not a commercial for Nodeware or for any of the guests that we bring on board, please let us know, and we will have you included, and we will get them included on it. If we can go to the next slide, I'll just spend a second. As you can see, we've got a good group of activities coming up. We're having a conversation with Mitch Morgan, the CEO of New Charter Technologies, and Chris Blackman from the JS Group about how MSPs are growing, from a nationwide standpoint, how they're growing and how they're supporting the SMB cybersecurity issues that are coming their way with local assistance and local support. We also have the folks at Gradient that are providing the billing tools for MSPs, the integration of those tools into the MSP billing system and ticketing system, and how that, from a productivity standpoint, is much, much easier for them. We're doing some joint things with them around how MSPs can better support small businesses and some of the things small businesses and mid-sized organizations should be asking of an MSP. We're also going to have a guest, Mark Weatherford, from the Chief Strategist at the National Cybersecurity Center, talking about some things they're doing for businesses. We also have a session coming up with the folks at CISA, talking about what CISA is doing to help small businesses as well. And then, as always, once a month, we have a live Nodeware demo and peer Q&A. We'll have the next one on June 30th. So if there's something you want to see around vulnerability management, something you want to see around continuous scanning, and the requirements that are now being put on organizations for continuous scanning versus what they might have done on a monthly basis or quarterly basis in the past, we can talk about that. And we will have a guest with us, either one of our end user customers or one of our MSPs that will be there available to answer questions as well. So with that, I want to introduce Jay Leek. We have had a few internet and technology problems this morning getting connected. So if Jay drops off, we will pause and hopefully he can come right back on. And if it happens a couple of times, we'll probably reschedule the session, but our fingers are crossed that we will make this work and we will be on our way today. So, Jay, first of all, just, thanks so much for joining us. Let's just start for a second, about, with the increased in cyber attacks, whether you're investing from a cybersecurity vendor side of it or on the end user side, just kind of your perspective of what you're hearing about how people are doing things differently to be better prepared for those attacks, and also, how are they protecting their confidential data? And if God forbid something happens, what are they doing to make sure they can come back and, from a business availability and continuity standpoint, they can get back to running their business? I mean, maybe we'll just start with kind of an open observations, and then we can get into some of the questions.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a pretty loaded question. I would say people aren't doing a good enough job is the bottom line. I mean, that's not new. I mean, the deal is because it's hard, so I think it really just depends. Like if you're a large company, you obviously have a much larger footprint and a lot more probably diversity across your environment, which makes it a challenge. And if you're a small company, you probably are underserved on resources because you just don't have that, So I think when I was a CISO at Blackstone, we would, buy kind of small, medium enterprise businesses. And, some of the things that we would work with them on, I think is very applicable kind of to your question. Whether people are doing this is a different conversation, but as far as advice is, the first thing you always want to know is who's accountable for security in the organization, right? And so could be the CEO, it could be the CIO, it could be a CISO, it could be, a director of IT or security or whatever, but making sure that there's somebody in the organization, whether it's their full-time job or their part-time job, that is being held accountable. So that's where everything starts. Secondly, does the leadership team of that organization have respect for that person and basically back that person and believe that they speak with authority is kind of the second question. So when we would do our CEO summit at Blackstone one time, I had show of hands. I was like, how many CEOs in here, know the name of their CISO or their security leader? And if you can't raise your hand, that's problem number one. Number two, how many CEOs in here have a reoccurring monthly or quarterly meeting one-on-one with that individual? If you're not doing that, that's problem number two. And then number three is, if you have that meeting, how much of the conversation do you understand when you're talking to the person? Do you understand 100%, 80%, 50%, 20%? If it's not 80 to 100%, you got the wrong person, doing it. So I think the everything starts there. And then secondly, my recommendation, for organizations, big or small, is then do you have a defined security budget? So if it's just kind of lumped in, with all of your other IT costs, you don't have real good visibility into what you're spending in security because it's kind of like a piece here, a piece there, or whatever. You really don't know what your relative spend is to other things in your business. The benchmark a lot of people always use is IT. It could be a very flawed benchmark, but you can benchmark it against lots of other categories in your business just to understand, you think you're spending a lot. Are you really, relative to other things or not? And you can kind of use a gut check, if not something more formulaic, to understand that. And so I think that's where things kind of begin. And then from there, you have to ask yourself the question of do I have an issue in my environment that I'm not aware of? Do I have am I breached today and people are siphoning off my credit card numbers or this or that or whatever? It's a really hard question to ask. And so there's a lot of different services and organizations that can do things kind of a breach preparation, a pre-response, called compromised assessment, even different ways of basically doing kind of like what an IR would be, but not necessarily an IR because you don't know that you have one, to understand if you have something in your organization that isn't necessarily supposed to be there or not wanted. And they don't have to be super costly, they can be from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on your size. But they literally the average one we used to run for our companies was 20 to 40 grand, and it might sound like a lot depending on the size of your business, but it's well worth it. Because then once either you have an issue and you get rid of it, or you don't have any issue, then at least you're starting with a clean slate And the last thing you want to do is start investing in a security program 12 months later to find out you've been compromised the entire time. And everybody goes, what have you been doing for the past 12 months? You've been spending a lot of money, you're compromised, but yet it was already in there in the beginning. And so I think like, the next thing too, like that you can kind of do that's pretty much free these days, and everybody in the world should do this, is anything that's remote access, whether it's your SaaS apps or O365 or whatever, dual factor authentication. It's built into everything. It's probably free for mostly everything. Turn it on. And there's no naysayer that gets to say otherwise. There's no squeaky wheel. There's no executive privilege, because you want your executives to have dual factor more than probably anybody else, actually. And just turn that on everywhere. Period. Full stop. As far as like requiring.
Okay. The dual factor and the executive is an interesting thing, and I want to kind of riff off that for a second on something that we're seeing happen, because we have so many executives that have a corporate device that are working from their home in a hybrid workforce. We now have a lot of people that are putting sensors on those laptops because they want to know what's on their home Wi-Fi, because they're worried about, especially in an urban environment, somebody getting access to their Wi-Fi and then getting into their laptop and then getting to critical data. We're not getting in the home consulting and home security business, but it's amazing how often we're hearing about organizations doing that. Are you seeing more companies, requiring their executives to do not only multi-factor authentication, but to really know what potentially has access to that laptop when they're working at home?
Yeah, so like, look, I think it hasn't got as much movement as I thought it would. And this is pre-COVID, and it probably is more going into it now. But like, as far as requiring, I'm not very, very aware of people like requiring it. As far as offering it, I am aware of a lot of large organizations that are offering the ability to deploy an enterprise-grade security stack, like whether it be a CrowdStrike or this or other things to your home computer. But I just don't know if that's a requirement. Now, I could totally foresee though someone saying, hey, look, if you're going to access corporate resources from your home computer, it's a requirement to do so. And there's technical capabilities to enforce that and all that kind of stuff. But it's not something that I can personally point to an organization that says that this is an absolute steadfast requirement.
Well, it's interesting. We're seeing, some of our MSPs that are deploying Nodeware to their clients, some of their clients are requiring their executives. So it's all client driven, right? So I'm a C-level exec of a manufacturing firm, and I want to make sure my sales people that are logging in from home through their corporate laptop, there's nobody getting onto their home Wi-Fi that's getting access to that data. And it's the executives putting it on the other executives. It's not the board, the investors' compliance requirement. It's just a personal concern about the confidentiality of the data.
Yeah, no, so that's 100% correct. And so you're absolutely seeing your customers, depending on where you sit in the supply chain, put those kind of requirements upstream or downstream, depending on where you sit. I know of a large insurance company, for instance, that had major offshoring in India, and they were processing like PII information, personal identifiable information, and heavily regulated data for this insurance company. And the people would go into, this outsourcer would go into the office. They would check their phones like in a locker. There were no phones, so no camera pictures or anything like that. Everything, no USBs, nothing could be copied. It was a clean room basically where they would work, and they would leave and get their phones and go home. Well, now those people in COVID started working from home, and they were able to put some level, require in that case, but from the customer, some level of endpoint software for data loss and monitoring and things of that nature. But the one thing they can never get around is having my phone and taking a picture of the screen if somebody really wanted to get it out. And I know it was a massive compliance headache for this particular CISO. He reached out and asked if I know any technical solutions that can help with that. Like, we were thinking, like, is there a way you can mess with the screen refresh so you couldn't take a picture or do different things, and we're not aware of it. But yeah, so my point though is, like, they actually, when that COVID happened and everyone started working from home, I mean, they didn't force the security stack onto those individuals' home computers of an outsourced provider that was processing this kind of information for them to try to meet regs, basically. So, you know, that's a kind of a large operation kind of movement. But absolutely, it's if you see anything like that, it's usually coming from like a third-party requirement. It might be a cost of doing business with that particular client, you know, and you got to suck it up. Now, you know, what you'll probably find though, in many cases, is you might find like double standards. I require my suppliers to do it, but I don't require my employees to do it. My employees would hate me if I required them to do that, you know, and that's why I outsource this work. Like, you'll find a lot of double standards like that, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side you sit on, I guess, you know, where companies are more willing to force their contractors to do things that they're not willing to force their employees to necessarily do. That's a big no-no. You're gonna end up having a problem eventually.
Well, you know, we know of a few law firms that quite supported by MSPs that used to use, you know, one of our competitors to do vulnerability management scanning to understand what were vulnerable devices. And they used to do it on a monthly or every other month basis. And now their clients, because of the critical data they're holding and the confidential data, their clients are requiring them to do either daily or weekly scans. And now the network degradation and normal business hour issues are driving a lot of opportunities for us and our patent that, quite frankly, didn't exist, you know, 6 months ago, because they weren't as concerned about it. And it gets to your point where the client is demanding, if you're going to have my confidential data upstream,
Yep.
you better do a good job of protecting it.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I mean, and that's generally probably what's driving it. It's either you either have like, you know, a security leader, CISO, whatever you want to call them, you know, that's trying to do the right thing because they're experienced and they've been bitten before in the past, or they've learned from their friends' mistakes or unfortunate situations or whatever, or you have a contractual obligation, a client side client driving something, or you're operating in a heavily regulated industry. You know, where quite frankly, even if you're heavily regulated, many of the requirements that you might have to do aren't necessarily making your environment more secure. In some cases, I found myself in a situation one time where in order to comply with compliance, we had to actually degrade the environment and make it less secure because the compliance reg just wasn't current. You know, and so those are, or it's in conflict with each other, particularly if you're international. You might find that you can't do it in Europe, but you have to do it in the US, or vice versa. It probably is more realistic. And then what do? You have to make a decision where you're domiciled and what kind of risk you're willing to take. So
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, we're working with a school district now that that scans all of their devices, but it takes them so long, and the systems they use are so slow. It takes them anywhere from 60 days to 120 days to scan all of the devices they have in order to figure out which ones are vulnerable, in order to figure out which ones they want to prioritize and which ones they want to segment from their critical data. And you know, this is a school district that's talking about moving from once every 60 days or once every 120 days, where they want to understand when a new device shows up on their network, they want to know within a day of that new device showing up so they can do something about it. And once again, it's just this thought mentality of, you know, how do they do that? And they're concerned for their data.
yeah, well, within a day might not be fast enough anyways. This whole concept of like a dwell time, you know, 270 days before something actually happens and blah, blah, blah. Like, sure, that might exist for, you know, very advanced attacks that probably, hopefully most people never have to really deal with. But what's not true about that necessarily is something that probably any security officer or CIO has or will deal with one or more times in their career, and that's ransomware. You know, ransomware doesn't take days or whatever. It can be impactful like within seconds. And if you don't have, in a case of something like that, if you don't have software controls in place that can respond at software speed, there's no human aspect that can ever, you know, protect you from that if you haven't taken the proactive controls in the first place to not be vulnerable. You know, and that's just an example. Ransomware is the obvious one. There's lots of other examples like that that are maybe less obvious, but that's the thing that's hitting, it's hitting the largest companies in the world and it's hitting the smallest companies in the world. And I don't, and on even though the dollars might be smaller when it hits smaller companies, on a relative basis, it might even be more impactful than the big companies, because a $20 million for a Fortune 500 ransom might not be nearly as impactful than a $500,000 ransom for a small business. So.
Yeah, the devastation it could have to the company could be incredible. And, it gets a little bit back to your point of, if a company has, one IT person or one security person, depending upon their level of credibility in the organization, determines a lot about what the organization is going to do with some of their recommendations, as well as some of the responsibility they want to take on. Is that something, as an investor, or maybe back in your Blackstone portfolio days, did you guys spend a lot of time talking about, who are those people? How do you hire the right people? How do you give them the right, if you will, not only direction, but authority to go do some things?
Yeah, we had I kind of gave you a little bit of a blueprint at the beginning of our Blackstone security stack. You had every function has like a 100-day plan, and part of your 100-day plan is figuring those things out. So in the case of Blackstone, maybe you worry about it some in due diligence, maybe not as much. It just depends, because unless there's there's a large material impact or something going on, you're holding a company for 3 to 5 years, and you just need to get it fixed and righted basically before you sell it. So it's a little bit different. Like for PE, if you're buying or investing in a company, they're eventually going to exit, versus if you're doing M&A in a situation where you're going to buy a company and integrate it and keep it in perpetuity. So there's different levels of types of diligence and how you think about problems that you can manage versus not manage and absorb. And in the case of PE, also, you're not connecting it back to one centralized shop, right? It's an isolated company. So if it does have a problem, it's isolated to that company or to that environment or whatever. It's not magnifying itself by integration into mothership or whatnot. So, but yeah, that's you're always like, do we have a security leader, not a security operator, leader in place? If not, guess what? You're hiring one. And I mean, I helped hire dozens of CISOs over the years when I was at Blackstone through our portfolio companies. Because if you don't have a leader in place, you can't build a program. There's just no one. It's just a waste of money, quite frankly. You can throw controls out, and you can basically play whack-a-mole by deploying different technical controls or tools out there, but they're never going to get optimized. They're never going to be running the way that you expect them to. You're never going to get your ROI back that you're looking to, and there's no one being held accountable if it doesn't go well. If it doesn't go well, and there's no one that gets to, carry the flag if things are avoided and and things do go well even. So, you need that champion.
On the ransomware attack and the potential for having to pay a ransomware attack, are you seeing, different organizations, both or from a board standpoint, putting more emphasis on, business continuity and business availability? And if you have a ransomware attack, who do you communicate with? Who do you talk to? How do you get it behind you? How do you get back up and running from a reliability, availability, serviceability of your, critical data?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's if it's not top in mind for every company, big or small, right now today, to be prepared for that to happen to you, then you're completely behind and you clearly haven't read the Wall Street Journal even or anything like that in the past 2 years. So I mean, whether you're prepared or not, it's a different story, but it should at least be top of mind. Most companies even think they're prepared, are probably not, and a tabletop exercise isn't going to tell you if you're actually prepared and if your data is actually backed up, it's actually working, it's actually restorable the way you think it is. Yeah, people know what their jobs are and how you can isolate the attack or this or that, whatever, and it's a massive problem. There's a lot that's been reported on the news. I can tell you just, where I sit today and visibility I have through my CISO peers and to sitting on the management board and different things like that. There's a lot of things that happen kind of in the background that never get reported out in the public because they're not required to, but massive there has never been a more heightened focus on resiliency, for sure. Now, you should try to protect yourselves and stop it first. And
Right.
there are next generation capabilities out there that exist today that didn't exist even 6 months ago to help you try to get ahead of that game. But you should build your environment assuming it's going to fail. And if it fails, how do you quickly recover? And then understand like which business operations, can be down for X period of time, which can be down for X plus some more extended period of time, and which ones, just don't matter, and prioritize that kind of through, proper continuity and, disaster recovery planning and preparation. But again, this is actually like technical work that needs to be done, not
Right.
just paper documents need to get written.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. Alan Alford and one of the folks from Cisco did a session for us about 9 months ago, and they talked about, if you're a small business and you're just getting into cyber hygiene, you need to do two-factor authentication. You need to figure out what devices are vulnerable. You got to get them away from your critical data, and then you got to do some basic cyber education. That's where you have to get started. And it's amazing what's led to that is, we put together this, we say that we have the lowest cost of sales and the quickest time to qualification, because we tell people to ask two questions, right? Do you know what devices you have that are vulnerable, and do you care? And do you know when a new device shows up on your network, and do you care? And those two questions alone, for a lot of small businesses that have one IT or one security person, or they've outsourced it, is kind of enough for them to go investigate.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how
Yeah.
how they proceed from there.
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, unless you're like one of the biggest companies in the world, like if you're even like a medium-sized enterprise, you should probably be outsourcing your security operations anyways, in my personal opinion. I mean, I built it. I've built SOCs and outsourced them, and the day, if you ever build one, the day it's done building, you're like, okay, let's outsource this thing. It's just, I don't care how big you are. It's exactly what we did at Nokia when Nokia was the 5th most valued brand in the world, even. Ultimately, it's hard to maintain that, even if you have size and scale, unless you're like the biggest of the biggest companies. But if you're kind of in that small, medium-sized business, small, medium-sized enterprise, you should be working with an MSSP of some sort to provide you that 24/7, provides you that consistency, I think more than anything, that they get to be, that they can drive across their different customer base, and to give scale that just one company will never have, and so there's unfortunately a lot of crappy ones out there. There's definitely some good ones out there that service different areas of the market. But even whenever you do that, it doesn't mean you've outsourced, your security to that MSSP or that organization. What you've done is you partnered with them. You still own the risk. It's still your business impact. You still need to have the accountable leader we talked about. You still need to have a program. You still need to run it. You just have, basically higher level of technical skills and capabilities than what you would be able to hire internally within your own company, whether you're a company of a few hundred people, a few thousand people, or 10 or 20,000 people.
Yeah, could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because there's a lot of people, I think, thinking about, what do I do from a SOC standpoint? If I only have a couple of people on my IT team or a couple of people on my security team, how do I even go about finding somebody to outsource that SOC to? Some of the criteria. I know that's not necessarily what you're involved with today, but maybe if you could expound on that for a little bit and just kind of talk about your perspective.
Well, I mean, full disclosure, I am invested in an MSSP. It's like a SOC as a service company, rather. It could look like an MSSP, but it's built to deliver through your MSPs, security operations. And so, and they're targeted small, medium-sized businesses. And so I think that's the key. It's like they're the big boys that are out there, and then there are lots of regional players that are out there. And then there are different ones that are focused on servicing kind of Global 2000 or Fortune 500, and then some that are looking to service smaller organizations. So I think the first key is, making sure that you're targeting somebody, or you're working with someone that's servicing your industry. There's some that are focused also more on FinServ or healthcare or whatever also.
Right.
How do you find it? I mean, like, talk to your friends, Google. There's different organizations that you probably are a part of that have that cohort of organizations that look similar to you or whatever, and just ask your friends. I mean, that's kind of word of mouth, or call them. I'm happy to, I'm not going to solicit any names on this, on a video like this, but happy to like point people in the right directions. You know, we have a pretty good feel in the market, not just what we invest in, but just in general. So, you know, but you talk to people and kind of hear what others are doing, hear what their experiences are, and then kind of understand what your needs are. You know, like if you're only U.S. focused, or if you have operations elsewhere, you know, and then, you know, depends on their capabilities that you have. You know, like some organizations will deliver you like their security stack, so you have to deploy like, you know, certain things onto your endpoint, certain things into the environment, you know, that whether you have it already today or not, they're going to push it on you, and that's one way of doing it. You have others, kind of like the organization I'm invested in, where it's bring your own stuff. So, you know, like you can have a heterogeneous environment. It's a combination of Windows Defender, CrowdStrike, Sophos, whatever it may be, and it all just plugs in whatever you have, right?
Yep.
And so there's different architectures like that. But then that implies also that you have something running in your environment, and your IT team knows how to do that, right? So there's just different trade-offs, kind of depending on like the size, the scale, and the you know, kind of structure of the organization. But the way my business worked when I was a CISO, or even today in investing, it's all about relationships. It's all about word of mouth. It's all about talking to people that you know, you trust. Security industry is a pretty small world, and everyone's kind of like, you know, 1 degree away, it seems like, from everyone. So, you know, start asking questions. You know, I question everything, trust nothing, you know, basically, you know, until you do, basically.
Yep.
So.
Well, you know, it's so we have a few SOC partners that are literally delivering SOC outsourcing to MSPs, because MSPs don't have the ability to do their own SOC work, and they're using Nodeware because they need continuous scanning, and they need during normal business hours, and they're providing it integrated into their SOC offering. So, you know, maybe offline we ought to talk about having the company that you're invested in on one of these sessions to talk about what they're doing to help mature the MSP marketplace, and what they're doing to help MSPs support more businesses, because that's part of the big challenge, is getting a sophisticated and mature MSP ecosystem to support all the, you know, small, medium-sized enterprises that need help.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm sure the CEO would be more than happy to come and join you. And, you know, it's interesting. It's like they are providing their platform to MSPs with no service, and they have like comes with some level of service, and they have comes with 24 by service. So there's different ways in which they can provide it depending on the MSP and the customer and who you're working with, basically. So having that kind of flexibility, you know, I think is super important. You know, and it's but there are literally like I've lost track, but there are probably, you know, 100 to 150 to maybe even 200 different companies in the U.S. alone that are providing some level of MSP-like services. You know, it's really astonishing, like how many of them, and many of them are like lifestyle businesses. You know, they've never raised like venture dollars, they never will. You know, they service you know, companies in Oklahoma or wherever, right? And they're great. You know, and you'll have good local support. And you know, and it's good enough, right? And there's others that are much more national and, you know, mature and can do other things too, right?
Well, but even in the good enough, you know, definition of what was good enough, if you will, pre-COVID versus what's good enough now, when cyber attacks are coming on a daily basis to a, you know, a significant portion of the marketplace, versus pre-COVID,
Yep.
when, you know, you could kind of say, well, the bad guys will never find me. Those days are kind of gone.
The most underserved area in security, and this is pre-COVID, but it's even exacerbated in COVID, is this small, medium-sized business, small, medium-sized enterprise. You know, you have like, yeah, I'll pick on Citibank just because they're large and sophisticated. Everybody knows them. You know, that they have like 2,500 people on their security team. They also are in like 180 countries, right? They have 550,000 employees, right? But they have defenses that like nobody else in the world can have, except for companies that look and feel like them. Then let's pick on the credit union in, you know, I grew up in Texas, so let's pick on your credit union in West Texas, in Abilene, right? That like processes money. It has, clients that depend on it. It doesn't have the big brand, but it's got all the same risks basically associated with it. And it's got like two guys that run IT and security for them, like, but they have the same kind of exposure. Like that area of the market, the small, medium size business or enterprise, it's the most underserved area in security today. It has been the case for, I don't know, the past 5+10 years, whatever. And it's going to unfortunately continue to be the case because there's so many businesses that fit in that category, and B, there's no really clearly defined channel to get to all of them at scale. You can get to a lot of them, but you can't get to them at scale. And so many companies don't even like target and try to market to those organizations because they don't have the resources to digest and to do anything without the help of an MSP or an MSSP or somebody like that, right? And number two, it's really expensive. Like I'd rather go land a $250,000 deal with Target than to land, $10,000, $25,000 deals with small, medium-sized business, right? Face it. So people make the business trade-off because they can get scale and have higher margins, and there's a defined market to get to Target versus the $10,000, $25,000 checks. So
well, one of the reasons why we do this series every 2 weeks talking about cybersecurity thought leadership, it's because small business leaders, small business owners, small business investors, small business COOs, CFOs, presidents, IT directors. When I say small business, it may be 20 employees up to 1,000 employees, but that segment of the market, they need to be able to do a few simple things to be a little bit safer, a little bit stronger. And our goal with all of these sections is to give somebody a couple of things they can go think about, and then we want to match them up with an MSP that can provide local assistance, local support, and be in a position to give them what they need. But it also has to be an MSP that has the desire and the capability to do more than kind of what was required 5 years ago.
Yeah, like, look, I mean, so like, look, we talked about the importance of leadership, having an accountable person. We talked about the importance of making sure leadership, respects them and they have the support of leadership. We talked about the importance of shining a flashlight on the budget so you know the actual spend, which you usually feel like you're spending a lot and you find out you're not spending that much, generally speaking, is my experience. Then we talked about the importance of two-factor. And maybe doing some kind of pre-sponsor compromise assessment. The one thing we didn't talk about that's also part of the playbook is everybody should have some form of advanced threat endpoint protection deployed. So whether it's a SentinelOne or a CrowdStrike or Carbon Black or whatever, I'm not necessarily going to go and plug any of them. They all have their pros and cons and they're all good in different ways, but you need to have something on the endpoint that is next generation, that's modern, that actually can get rid of what's probably mostly noise, but noise has gotten a lot more advanced. While it's not necessarily targeting you per se as an organization, it's looking for the lowest wall to get over so they can get a hook into your organization, right? And then I think the awareness factor is also very important. I'm invested in a phishing company, and we have seen phishing, attacks go up like over 1,000% since COVID started, and it was already ridiculously high. And then that's all phishing is. It's the law of numbers. The one bad click, without the right protections on the endpoint, it's not always about endpoint too. Sometimes it's about putting your password in. No endpoint can stop that. But still, but like it's there is definitely the first line of defense is absolutely your employees, and and it's worth putting the time and effort in to make sure employees, people on keyboard, understand that their importance of playing the role in defending your organization.
Great points. So, in our commitment to answer the questions that people ask, we have a question that's probably more for you personally than it is necessarily for this particular topic. but it's about as security tech startups, are they going to see a harder time in the coming months with the deflation or devaluation of the tech company's overall valuation?
Yeah, like, look, it depends how you want to answer that. Like, there over the past 5 years, so let's take a step back. So I invest in early stage security startups. That's what SYN Ventures does. We invest in like 1.5% to 2% of the companies that we meet, and we're actually the most active cybersecurity investors in the world over the past 5 years by deal count, and have the second most exits at the same period of time. So we're about making investments, also realizing it, helping people create wealth and create returns for our LPs, and finding good long-term homes for our companies, because most of these companies are never going to be public companies, right? And so it depends where you're at on the cycle. There are companies, like we've met probably 3,000 security companies over the past 5 years. We've made roughly 50 investments, and we sit there and we look at companies that got funded that we met with, and we scratch our heads. We're like, how in the world did that company ever raise money? And the answer is there's too much money out there. So what we're going to see now, it's already started. It started at the beginning of this year, and it's only cranked up more over the past 30 to 40 days. We've been through two generational changes since the beginning of this year in the way the venture community looks at investing. And this is not just security, this is tech and venture more broadly. We've been in two generational changes in the past 4 months of this year that are both more significant than the housing recession of 2008 and the dot-com bust as well. And so what you're seeing happening is, like, deals are still getting done, investments are still getting made. There's definitely a lot of compression on valuations when you're looking at later stage deals. So call it series, C or later, or B or later even maybe. For the most part, seed and A's have kind of held up to some degree, but they've definitely come down a little bit in reality. But more importantly, what you're seeing is, you're not seeing companies that never should have got funded get funded. And that's at the seed A, B, C, D, whatever layer. They're just not getting funded at any valuation whatsoever, right? And so that's number one. That's the big change. The second one is, like, if you look at, let's just pick on CrowdStrike for a second. They've lost 40% of their enterprise value over the past 60 days, or since the beginning of the year or something like that. But the fundamentals of their business have not changed one bit. In fact, they're probably even doing better as a result of the Ukraine war than they were doing previously, with this global cyber war happening. In addition,
right.
Like, I'm not saying for sure, I haven't looked into it. I'm just assuming this is probably the case. Yet their enterprise value has gotten slashed, right? And so I think that we're seeing this in our companies. Like, the buyers are still buying security products, so you're still selling, right? The issue is that, where one company used to, if they're public, like a CrowdStrike or whatever, they were trading at 25 times revenue. Now they're trading at 10 times revenue. Like, the cost of the acquisition is a lot more expensive, right, when you're looking at the exit. So it would be, it's much harder probably right now for you to sell your company also, just because the cost of capital is way more significant, particularly if it's related to a stock-based deal. So this is all going to settle out and level out. But we believe, and we're obviously in the security business, so I hope we're not just patting ourselves on the back here, telling us these things, but we do believe that security is much more resilient to a recession relative to all other areas in tech, or at least most other areas in tech. Because the buyers still need to buy security technologies. They still need to protect their organizations. Fortunately, there's a physical war happening in Ukraine, and there's a global cyber war happening that is like never been seen before as well, and it's impacting a lot of companies. And you're going to find, through time of ransomware, you already are finding, you're going to continue to find Russia needing to have other ways to get dollars or bitcoins into their country to support their economy, and that's 100% going to be happening through cyber attacks and through ransomware. We've never seen Russia, until more recently over the past 6 months, hack for monetary gain. They hack for all kinds of other reasons, and this is a superpower, probably the third largest superpower now, looking to hack for monetary gain, and it's going to impact a lot of companies, and they'll need to show up and buy. So, harder to raise money if you're not a real company. Never should have been able to raise money in the first place. Definitely going to have a haircut of valuations at later stage. Going to have some compression earlier even as well. If you're selling a product solving real problems, though, you should still see the buyer show up and buy. There's going to be more scrutiny on spending, but as long as you're solving any problem, you're probably still in good shape. And don't expect exit multiples to be as crazy as they have been, just like the entrance multiples aren't, for the foreseeable future until public comps start coming back around.
Got it. No, that's great. It's great perspective. We've got about 15 minutes. If anybody's got any other questions, please submit them, and we'll get to them before we're done. One question, as an end user organization, a manufacturing firm, retail firm, are there things that you ought to be thinking about that's going to be on the next board conversation or the next investor call that you should be thinking about having the answers to ahead of time that maybe you didn't pay any attention to or weren't focused on 12 months ago?
Well, I hate to be a broken record here, but when I talk to my CISO friends in those categories and kind of anywhere, it's like they can't wait to walk into a board meeting and talk about anything other than ransomware. Everyone's really worried about this because everyone's getting impacted because it's having a significant impact to business operations. It's not even the ransom that's getting paid, or not, or whatever. It's the recovery and the impact to the business, and it's so visible. So if that's not being talked about, like, you should be prepared, to about that and have an answer for that. There's not an answer, but be doing things to prepare for that if it's not already a topic. I do think also it's what I mentioned earlier. It can't go understated. Historically, nation states hacking for monetary gain, Iran and North Korea, most notably. Like, if you think about the superpowers and security in the world, you got the U.S. followed by China, followed by Russia, and even though you put North Korea and Iran underneath China, they're so far less sophisticated than the other three. It's not even funny. And so, we're watching very closely across a lot of our companies and talking to lots of people about the impact of this. And these sanctions aren't going to go away anytime soon, even if Russia decides to pull out of Ukraine. And as long as those sanctions are in place, I think it's really changing kind of the threat landscape. Russia's going to look for other ways to, monetize their capabilities that they have that are superpower capabilities. So I think, what are you doing differently to prepare for that? How do you think about that differently? Is very important. And then I mentioned this earlier. We'll see where this goes, but this new regulation coming out, remember a few years ago when GDPR was coming to be active, I think in 19, and the mad scramble around that, and everybody worried about these fines of up to 2% of your global revenue. The fact that's going to be applied now to the health and status of your security program, this, even though it's European based, you expect Europe's going to lead that. Europe has brought kind of the global privacy standards all around the world kind of up to a different bar. And I would expect that to have similar kind of impact on security, even though it's coming from Europe versus the US here, assuming you have operations in Europe at least. And if you do, I would be well prepared to answer that proactively before you get asked about it, because we've learned a lot over the years through GDPR and everything, and how that impacted or didn't or whatever, but it's definitely been big fines that have been levied. It's cost a lot of people a lot of money. And it's interesting. The next question would be does the US do something? If you think about it, 10 years ago, the US was the weakest in privacy. Today, they're pretty strong, but state by state, unfortunately, privacy laws and regulations, and it can be very, convoluted and contradictory. I won't be surprised if you see things like that coming in the United States as well. I definitely have opinions on this. It's opinions, though. There's no facts that I'm aware of. There's lots of things that have been proposed. Nothing I'm aware of, at least it's got passed. But I would get ahead of that question.
No, that's great perspective. And we're seeing it, to your point. We're seeing it on endpoint detection we're seeing people are saying, every board meeting is coming. I got to talk about what are we doing from an endpoint protection? What am I doing to understand where my vulnerabilities are? What's connected to my critical data? How do I get devices that I don't have time to fix away from my critical data? And it's all around ransomware, right? And it's all around ransomware that leads potentially to, if God forbid something happens, how do I get my business up and running? And then, if I happen to have cyber insurance, how do I turn around and get insurance again? Right? Because the
Well, there's
insurance
that.
ability.
Yeah, if you're even insurable, so that's the issue. I mean, you're seeing a lot of companies, particularly even small, medium-sized businesses right now, when they go to renew, the insurance company just says, sorry, you're not insurable. And I've heard this more and more of late, which is fascinating. You'd think you'd be insurable at some cost. It's like, I can get healthcare, like, it's some cost, right? Like, it just might cost me more. And they're like, nope, doesn't matter what you pay, we're just not going to underwrite you. And it's fascinating and scary at the same time.
Well, I think there's so much of the unknowns. I mean, we have a couple of insurance companies now that take the nodeware output, because it'll run during normal business hours. They put it into the questionnaire, and they're using that as a determining factor for how they're going to decide whether they're going to be insurable or whether they're going to renew. And that is driving a lot of the activity, not only for the end customer, but also for the MSPs that are now trying to figure out, if this has been outsourced to me, what are my responsibilities, and am I insurable? And to your point, and to the SOC organizations that are back of them, are they insurable, and where is the line of liability and responsiveness?
Yeah. No, it's a big problem. I mean, definitely a number of my companies, I was just on with the CISO of a major insurance company yesterday, and we were just kind of talking about, how they can start providing recommendations and capabilities, or maybe even reselling or whatever different solutions that can help companies become insurable when they're not. And so, there's definitely a few things in my portfolio that they're contemplating around that to help. But it's a problem, because the last thing insurance company wants to tell you is like they can't take your money, but they're not going to take your money if they're worried they're going to have to put too much out because of you, and there's just so much legacy unknowns, and they don't feel like you have a good, handle on your environment, as you said, like what devices you have and how it's changing, and et cetera, et cetera. Like, they're just not going to take on the risk.
No, and we're hearing it a lot where I had insurance once and now I can't get it again because
Yep.
the laundry list of things to do to become insurable the second time is way too great, and I don't have the business acumen, skills, or time to do them all.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating, and that's after they've raised rates, 30, 40, 50, 80, 100% in some cases, and then they finally just come back and say, yeah, not going to renew it anymore. So we hear all those stories too. I know firsthand, companies and that have experienced that myself.
Well, look, I appreciate your time. We don't have any other questions from the audience. What I want to do is I want to go to our schedule of the sessions we have coming up, and then I'll come back to you for a couple of kind of closing remarks and some advice you might have. And maybe one thing you could elaborate on is, if somebody convinced you to go to work for a company of 100 or 500 people, with your background, what are some things you might immediately do to kind of get started, kind of on your first 100-day kind of concept? Before we get to that, Jay, just to give everybody a little bit of background, we're going to have Mitch Morgan from New Charter Technologies coming up on the 9th, talking about how MSPs are growing, how MSPs are providing that type of skills, assistance, and responsiveness to small businesses, as well as what small businesses need to know to ask an MSP. And then we've got the Gradient folks and some of the things they're doing around billing and integrating your ticketing system as an MSP. We've got Mark from the National Cybersecurity Center talking about some things they're doing for businesses, connected with some of the things CISA's doing for businesses. And then we will have some ongoing sessions that we haven't announced yet around cyber insurance and cyber liability, kind of coming off the last conversation we just had. As well as some things that we're doing to assist organizations from SOC companies that are not only helping end users, but but helping MSPs and providing that outsourcing of SOC capabilities. All those things will round out in June with our live demo and peer Q&A session. So if you have any questions or you just want to hear what's on the minds of your peers, log in for that. As always, connect with us on LinkedIn, get involved with the events, ask questions. We're all about collaboration with your peers. We're kind of all in this together. The reason we do these sessions is they're designed to be, public service announcements. They're not a commercial for us or for SYN or for the companies they're invested in. It's designed to help you be a little bit smarter, be a little bit safer, and be a little bit stronger against the increases of requirements and the frequencies of attacks. So thanks so much for being with us today. Jay, I'll just turn it back to you for a couple of closing thoughts. And as I said, if you went to work for a small business, what's some things you might do in the first 100 days?
Run. No, no, I really gave you the, I gave the playbook, honestly.
Yep.
So, I mean, I can repeat it again, but I mean, it's
really, we got it in the recording.
Yeah, it's really simple. I mean, the only other thing I would add to that playbook that we've talked on is I would absolutely find an outsourced provider that could provide me, it was MSSP, SOC as a service, whatever, but I would make sure that I had, somebody that, has some level of scale and consistency that, I can partner with to provide security operations and security solutions to me. So as a small, medium-sized business, 100 to 500 or even 1,000 or 2,000, you just never will have the resources to be able to protect your organization the way somebody like that can help you do.
Well, perfect. Jay, thanks so much for your time. We will have the broadcast up on YouTube in the next couple of days. If you want to contact us, either to get a hold of Jay or to do a free trial with Nodeware, or just to ask us any other questions, and always, if there's a particular topic or presenter that you'd like to see us have on our cybersecurity thought leadership series, please let us know, and we'll do our best to get them on board. And as always, for our partners, we provide them custom registration links. So any of their clients or prospects that they want to invite, we provide those back to our partners as well. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for everybody for dialing in today. Jay, thanks so much for all your insights and perspective. We really appreciate it. And we'll talk further about that SOC organization that we might want to have them on board to talk about how they're helping to support MSPs and how they're helping the MSP ecosystem be better and stronger to support, as you said, this underserved market.
100%. Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care. All right, bye.